Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Today, inshallah, we shall begin our study of the beautiful plant kingdom. It is difficult to imagine, but plants were not always on the surface of a planet. Apparently, some 1 billion years ago, life flourished in water, although there were no plants on land. Today, inshallah, we shall give an overview of what we're going to talk about in this chapter and in the subsequent chapters. We shall define what a plant is. We shall comment on the evolution of plants. How did plants come about? And thirdly, we shall comment on some special adaptations that plants had to make to life on land, because life is very different on land than it is in water. Fourthly, we shall comment on the life cycle of plants. All plants demonstrate something called alteration of generations. And this term, alteration of generation, will become quite familiar to us by the time we're done. So this is the agenda for us, inshallah, and we shall begin. So first thing we have to do is we have to define what a plant is. Okay, as you can see in this beautiful verdant picture, the predominant feature of plants is that they are photosynthetic. That's what you probably appreciate of plants, and that's what most people appreciate. Plants are photosynthetic, multicellular eukaryotes. Now, there are some algae that are photosynthetic, there are some bacteria that are photosynthetic, but plants are photosynthetic, multicellular eukaryotes. And they have a cellulose cell wall. That's something very particularly peculiar to plants. Now, bacteria have cell wall, if you recall, but their cell wall is made of peptidoglycans. So the cell wall of plants is very distinct, and it is made of cellulose, bark type stuff. So this is our working definition of plant: photosynthetic multicellular eukaryotes with cellulose cell wall. Now, but where did they come from? Okay, where did they come from? Okay, that's what we're going to talk about next. The theory is that plants evolved from green algae. Okay, so we talked about red algae, brown algae, green algae, right? These are protists. Okay, and it's thought that the green algae evolved into land plants. They kind of migrated slowly to land, and they made some special adaptations to life on land. First, recall that green algae is a protist. Okay, this is the summary of the kingdom Protista, which we studied before, and we said the protists can be divided into animal-like protists. Those are the protozoans, plant-like protists called the algae, and the fungus-like protists, right? And the green algae was right there for us. Okay, green algae is special. Green algae has cellulose, like plants, and green algae also has chlorophyll, and it stores energy as starch, like plants do. So green algae has many features of plants, although it has some very peculiar features of protists as well, as we talked about before. But nevertheless, green algae gets this crown distinction that it gave rise to all land plants. Now, as I suggested, life on land is not necessarily easy. So what type of adaptations did these plants have to make? We have fossils of some very early plants, which, as you can imagine, is much simpler than some of the more complex flowering plants. For example, this over here, okay, this is an example of a xylophyte. They don't have leaves. They're very simple in structure. So one of the adaptations that they had to make is that they had to secure water from ground. See, if a living thing lives in water, there's no trouble finding water because it's everywhere. But plants that live on land, they have to dig their roots into the ground to find and absorb the water from the ground, right? And some plants, like cactus in the desert, they have to work really, really, really hard to find that water from the ground. The second thing is, and you can imagine, see, plants make gametes. They make gametes just like other living things. Now, for example, a frog, okay, when the frogs mate, they mate in the water, and the sperm and eggs meet in the water. The sperm swims and meets the eggs, and makes a zygote, and then they make tadpoles in the water, right? So the fusion of gametes occurs in water, but plants that live on land, they have to find a way of fusion of the gametes outside of water. Okay, now this may not be readily apparent to you presently, but inshallah when we do talk about that, this will become quite clear, and some of the ingenious methods the plant have figured out how to do this. The third thing that they have to do is they have to protect the gametes from drying out, right? How does a plant protect the seed from drying out, right? And finally, they have to withstand weather, they have to withstand the elements, and they also have to grow against gravity, right? So these are some of the adaptations that the plant had to make to live on land. So we define what a plant is. Okay, multicellular photosynthetic eukaryote with cellulose cell walls. We suggested the plants evolved perhaps from the green algae because there's some peculiar features of green algae that are common to plants. Now we shall talk about the plant adaptations in some detail. Particularly, we should comment on the cuticle, the photosynthetic organs of plants, the role of roots and stems, and the seeds. These are all features of plants which we mentioned, or adaptations of plants to land life. So here it is, cuticle. Cuticle is a waxy covering on plant surfaces. It covers most fruits, leaves, stems, and it's a waxy coat which prevents water loss. Now the plant roots absorb the water. How hurtful it would be, so to speak, for plants if they absorb the water and it's just like, dries out in the sun, right? So, but the cuticle prevents. So here's a cuticle. It's a waxy coating on fruits, leaves, stems, and plants that prevents water loss. So this was one very important adaptation that plant made, and also makes them look pretty in a way. The second adaptation is that plants develop the photosynthetic organs, right? Plants are photosynthetic kings, so to speak, right? And a leaf is a plant organ that is designed to do photosynthesis. So here's a cuticle that prevents the water loss. But this is a cross-section of a leaf, and you will see the cells over here all lined up with all the chlorophyll facing the sun, okay? And the leaf has vascular tissue and has a very beautiful anatomy that's not haphazardly put together, okay? So it's the second adaptation. Roots, mind you, are also adaptation of plants. Roots absorb water and minerals from the ground, right? There's very little water moisture, and certainly not enough in the air for plants to get. So all the water that the plant needs must come from the ground. And also the minerals, okay? And also the minerals, okay? So plants absorb water and minerals from the ground, and that's where the roots occur. Now, roots are also very specialized structures, as we shall see in the future. Roots also anchor the plant and help the plant grow against gravity, as we spoke about before. Okay. Some roots have some special functions, such as radishes and potatoes. They store starch, and starch is just sugar that the plant makes, right? All the photosynthetic hard work of the plant results in producing the sugar, which is stored as starch. Okay, and so roots protect this hard work, and they store the starch underground to protect it, so to speak, right? Almost like a squirrel gets to it or something like that, right? So roots, as you can see, are also some very special adaptations of plants. Now stems, you might not think very much of stems, but stems are also very, very curiously and beautifully in their anatomy. Their job is to transport the plant and to support the plant, and sometimes as a storage also for the starches that plant produce. Now, if you take a cross section of a stem over here like this, it kind of looks like this, okay? And if you look at it under higher magnification, you see there is a structure over here, and then you will see these what these are actually like straws put together, like straws, like you drink, pop or Coke or something like that. And these are the vascular elements of a plant, okay? In other words, they're like the blood vessels of the plants, the phloem and the xylem, okay? The phloem is where, it's like these are the highways of the plants. The phloem is how the plant transports water and sugar from one area of the plant to a second area of the plant. The xylem is where the water that's coming from the ground, from the roots, is reaching up to the higher levels of the plants. So these are highways, these are the blood vessels like the arteries and veins in human beings. Similar structures are also found in plants, okay? And green stems, the stems that are green in color, are so because they're also photosynthetic. They're able to perform their own photosynthesis. So in green stem plants, photosynthesis can occur, of course, in the leaves, but also in the stems as well. So you can think of the phloem and the xylem as vascular bundles, as like arteries and veins of plants. And we shall, inshallah, study this in detail in the future. We can divide plants into two types: vascular plants and non-vascular plants. Vascular plants, those are the ones that have the xylem and phloem. These are highways, right, where the water and the sugar and the minerals go one way and the other way, etc. Vascular plants, they get their water and nutrients from the roots. But the most simplistic, most basic plants, they don't have these vessels. They're not very developed like that. Non-vascular plants, they don't have these highways of nutrient transport, etc. Non-vascular plants, they get their water and nutrients directly from the ground by osmosis and diffusion. For example, moss that's covered over here on the ground and on the tree over here. Mosses hug the ground because they need the water and minerals from the ground directly by osmosis and diffusion. They can't grow very much because they have no way of transporting all of that stuff very much high, about an inch or two above the ground. Okay, so they're dependent on hugging the ground very closely for their nutrient needs. So therefore, non-vascular plants are very small. They're not very tall at all. They're few cell thick, in fact, like the liverworts that you see over here. Tiny plants, few cell layers thick, and this is a super high magnification of a moss. It's a very tiny thing. Okay, and if you look at liverwort, in fact, under a microscope, you can almost count the number of cell layers that it has, like that. Okay, up close, it's actually transparent. Kingdom plants then can be divided into these non-seed producing and seed producing plants. Okay, this is the fifth adaptation we shall talk about. So one of the adaptations is that plants make seeds. Seeds protect plant zygote. Okay, what a seed is basically, a seed is an embryo of the plant. It is the zygote. When the sperm and egg meet and they make the zygote, that's the embryo of the plant. And this is surrounded by what we call the seed. The seed has stored food for the embryo. Okay, so stored food for the embryo. And seed has a seed coat that protects it from drying and aids in the dispersal of the seed. So the seed that we commonly think about from plants is basically a plant embryo with its food supply over here. Okay, so plants reproduce either by making spores or by making seeds. Okay, so plants reproduce by making spores or by making seeds. Now, when the seed lands on the ground here, the seed then develops into a new plant, right? So therefore, seed is not basically an embryo which needs to be protected, and this is another one of the plant adaptations. So we suggested then that plant kingdom is divided into simple, basic non-seed producing plants and seed producing plants. The further the plant kingdom can be divided into non-seed producing plants that don't have any vasculature and non-seed producing plants that do have a vasculature, and all seed producing plants have vasculature. So what have we talked about so far? We defined what a plant is. We suggested the evolution of plants from the green algae, perhaps, and we commented on some plant adaptations such as the cuticle, photosynthetic organs, the roots, stems, and seeds. Inshallah, after a brief pause, we shall talk about the life cycle of plants, a very important phenomenon, the alteration of generations. Until then, as-salatu wa-salamu ala rasulillah, walhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. Assalamu alaikum.